DADA was a European art movement that took place from 1916 to 1922. The founders of DADA were young artists who had witnessed firsthand the atrocities of World War I. They questioned why such events had been allowed to take place and wondered what powers had caused so much bloodshed. They began to formalize their cultural protest against war, militarism, chauvinism, and the bourgeois civilization that gave rise to such monsters in the form of an art movement, or non-art movement as they put it. Together with one voice, they declared that the existing order had only brought about suffering and death, and it no longer had any say in how the world operated. Neutral Switzerland became a natural habitat for people who were opposed to the war to congregate together and share views, particularly in Zurich, where the founding members of the DADA met. They used the Cabaret Voltaire as the launchpad for their philosophies and the way by which they would reach their audience. Hugo Ball, one of the Dada's founding members, introduced it to the world by way of a performance in which he read to the cabaret patrons a poem he had written called The Carousel. The Carousel consisted of a series of nonsensical words which he read with a dramatic gusto and an expressionless face. The guests listened intently for several minutes, trying to figure out what he meant by it, but eventually cracked up laughing, realizing the absurdity of the situation. This reaction is a good example of how people thought of art at this time. Only a few decades prior to Dada, art was meant only for the wealthiest and most cultured of citizens, and only in the salon galleries, because the aristocracy were the ones who funded it. Artists had to be classically trained for years before they could be exhibited, and even then, they could only paint subjects that would get them more recognition. The system provided that those in power could glorify themselves by funding an artist's work. As the 19th century finished up, artists began to resist the strict hold that the aristocracy had, and question what was accepted as good art. They began to choose strange subjects and abstract their work beyond what looked right. And this escalated drastically around the turn of the century, to where objects began to be unrecognizable, and the artists loved it that way. Dada was the culmination of this quest for abstraction as a challenge to authority. It was the absolute abstraction in its content, its presentation, and even its process. This was a piece by Marcel Duchamp. He exhibited it, but didn't consider it complete until it was dropped during transport, causing the glass to break. The fact that Duchamp had no say over that event thrilled him and the other Dadas. Artistic intentions to them were useless and foolish. This is another of Duchamp's works in which he strove to desanctify and disgrace art. He took a simple postcard of the Mona Lisa and brought her gender into question. Clearly, the Dada's intentions were about provoking emotional reactions from the viewer. If the pieces of art failed to offend the audience, then Tristan Tzar's writings usually would. Perhaps the most famous work by the Dadas was Duchamp's Fountain, in which he took a urinal, put it sideways, and signed the side with a fake name. Shock value was thought to be the only way to get through to people, and to break the hold that academic art had over people's perceptions. This style of art, using commercially made objects, is called ready-made art. Dada spread from Zurich to Berlin, Paris, and New York. Man Ray is one of the American Dadas. He worked in a type of ready-made art called assemblage, where he joined different objects together. His aim was to destroy the intended meaning of the object, in this case an ironing board with nails attached to it. So what do we make of all this nonsense? Should these non-artists be commended for their work? Is defiling academic expectations noble business? I say yes. It's the continuation of a long line of artists who challenged what was expected and ended up discovering something better. It's where innovation comes from, and it's how society has progressed, through challenge and change. Ironically, but very consistent with their ideals, Dada self-destructed when it was in danger of becoming acceptable. Many of the Dadas went off to work with Salvador Dali and the Surrealists to break ground into fascinating new directions, and to give stoner college students something to decorate their walls with. The Dadas encouraged and contributed to the philosophies of countless art movements, such as abstract expressionism. And Andy Warhol may have not been able to lead the charge for pop art during the 1950s had the Dadas not made use of everyday items very common in their art. Dada has left a major mark on the art world, and its spirit is carried on today.